In this lesson, we'll take a look at the width from light direction node. So with this particular contour shader, this is one that will actually give us the ability to control the thickness of our contour lines based on some kind of an arbitrary light direction. So really this behaves in a method very similar to our width from light contour node, except the only difference is that we don't actually have to specify some kind of a light. So before we actually utilize this particular contour node, what we'll first need to do is go into the render settings, make sure that we have contour rendering enabled. We'll also go ahead and make sure that we have the contour function levels and the contour store both plugged into the custom shaders. Also, once you plug those in, take a look inside the levels and make sure that you have the difference index disabled. So that way we won't have to worry about generating any contour lines around every single triangulated polygon on our mesh. Alright, so once you do that, we can now actually drop on our light from direction, or light width from direction. So let's go ahead. Let's actually drop in width from light direction. And let's take a look over in our materials tab. And we'll grab our different materials, take a look inside the shading group, and inside the metal ray tab, we'll make sure that we plug this contour shader into the contour shading port of all of our different materials. There we go. Make sure that we get all the different materials in here. Alright, so once that's connected in, we can now take a look at this width from light direction. And if you've already had a chance to go through the width from light lesson, you'll see that really everything in here looks identical except for this area right here. So this will actually allow us to now, instead of specifying some kind of a light that it derives the light direction from, we can now simply arbitrarily determine the light direction that we want. So let's start by first just taking a quick render at what we have. And you'll see that once we render this, how we get these contour lines that are thicker in certain areas. So right now, this is, again, being defined by these three coordinates. So these are referring to X, Y, and Z directions. So right now, this light direction is essentially coming in from the negative Z direction. And this is apparent if you take a look at the axis indicators down in the lower corner of your screen. And you'll see that that corresponds exactly to what we see here. These really thicker lines are more toward the front. These thinner lines are oriented right along the negative Z axis. So if we wanted the lines to appear as if they're coming more in a downward direction, all we would need to do is set the Z direction to a +1, set this to a -1, and now we should start to get some lines that are able to change their appearance a little bit more. And once we render that, you can see that the result is somewhat visible, although right now, because these lines are so thick, it does become sort of difficult to see the actual result that we want. So let's try taking the actual maximum width and dropping this down quite a bit, something to like 0.5. And another way that we can start to decrease the actual sensitivity to the line drawing is to go back to the hypershade, and we'll take a look at the contour actual contrast node, and we'll take a look at the normal delta. Right now, anything that is angled more than 90 degrees away from the camera will get a really thick line drawn around it. So let's decrease its sensitivity by giving it a higher level. And now it shouldn't be quite as sensitive to some of these smaller little areas. And now that becomes a little bit easier to see, where now these thicker lines are oriented a little bit more toward this negative Y direction. So now we have these thicker lines that are angled more of in a downward direction. So we'll get thicker lines up here, and underneath, where we have some of these areas that are facing away from the direction that we specified, we get these thinner lines. Alright, so that's a look at how we can utilize this width from light direction contour shader.